Okay, welcome Cloud Gurus, and in this lecture we're going to go ahead and create a CloudFront distribution which will link to an S3 bucket. So in our last lecture, our last couple of lectures, we created an S3 bucket called a Cloud Guru, which we can see here. And we actually uploaded the logo file for the course and we made it public. So we click on here and we go to properties, you can see the URL here in which to access it. Now what we're going to do is we're going to make it so that every time you go and get the test logo, it's going to be done through a content distribution network. So I'm going to go back here, I'm going to go to CloudFront. Because we've never used it before, we'll get the splash screen. And we're going to create a distribution. So there's, as mentioned in the last lecture, there's two different distribution types. There's a web distribution and an RTMP distribution. And RTMP distributions are typically used for Adobe Flash Media RTMP protocol. So that's where you're streaming Flash files. Now, because we want to keep this simple, we're going to use the web distribution. So we'll get started. Now the first thing we need to do in order to create our distribution is determine what our origin is. So we go here and we select the taskbar and we can see origin ID. So we want acloudguru.s3 and that's our S3 bucket. Now restrict bucket access. We can say yes or no. If we restrict our bucket access, basically that is sending a command to S3 saying that only CloudFront can access the S3 bucket. Even if you have files inside your S3 bucket, let's open up a new tab and we'll go have a look. Even if you have files inside an S3 bucket and you make it public, only CloudFront will actually be able to access it. So the links won't work. And a good example is if we go into a Cloud Guru and we click here on our test logo, we go to the properties. This link would not work if we restricted access to our bucket. So I'm just going to leave it as restrict bucket access as yes, and that will basically, the way it does this is it creates an origin access identity, and you can use an existing identity, but because this is a new account we're going to create a new one. And grant read permission on the bucket says you've either got the option of yes, update the bucket policy, or no, I will update permissions. And all that means is that if we go back to our S3 bucket, we have a file like our hello.rich text format file. We haven't actually made this public. We have to go in and make it public. So we go in and make that public. If we, coming back to here, if we say yes, update bucket policy, that will grant read permissions on the bucket and actually make everything within the bucket public. If you select it no, I will update permissions, that's where you'll go in and manually update the permissions yourself to what you want in that bucket to be made public. So just bear that in mind. Okay, so we'll now scroll down to our default cache behavior settings and path pattern. So what a path pattern does is basically it allows you to use regular expressions to direct where the CloudFront distribution is getting its origin from. So you can create a regular expression which basically says if this is a JPEG file that the user is trying to get, then go to this S3 bucket. If it's a PDF file, go to a separate S3 bucket. And if it's a PHP file, for example, go to a completely different origin, which would be like an EC2 instance. So that's what a path pattern does. We can then also set our viewer protocol policy. So we can say that the viewer can view anything on this distribution using HTTP and HTTPS, or if they try and access a HTTP, it would redirect to HTTPS by default, or you can select HTTPS only, which means that if a user tries to go to the HTTP, they'll get an error message. So we'll just leave it as HTTP and HTTPS. And here you can add different HTTP methods. So originally it was just get and head, but now you've got two different options. You've got get, head, and options, and you've got get, head, options, put, post, patch, delete. Now if you select this, it will basically enable a user to upload a file to their edge location, and then Amazon's distribution network will actually upload that file to the S3 bucket, but the user themselves is just delivering the file to the edge location. So it depends on what kind of application you're trying to build. For simplicity's sakes though, I think I'll just leave this as get head. Okay, so now we'll look at object caching, and you can see that there's two options. There's use origin cache headers, or there's customize. So object caching simply allows you to set the time in which an object is going to live at a edge location. So if we're going to look for a JPEG file, for example, you can either use the origin cache's basically cache header, so that's where the origin is saying I want this file to be stored at an edge location for 500 seconds, and CloudFront distribution will respect that. Or you can override your origin cache headers and you can say I want to set my own TTL. I want to set a TTL of 60 seconds so that an object will live at each edge location for a period of 60 seconds, then after that it will go back to the original origin setting. Okay, then you've got the option of forwarding cookies or forwarding query strings. Now if you're a developer you'll know what that means, but if you're not, it doesn't matter. You've also got smooth streaming, so you can turn on smooth streaming, which is for Microsoft streaming services. And we've also got restrict viewer access, use signed URLs. Now this is a really good security feature, which means you can send a user a link to a particular URL and you've got to program it, but it means that they can only access that link using X509 certificates or PEM files. So effectively only the people, that link is not accessible to the entire outside world, it's only accessible to the people who you want it accessible to. We'll go down to distribution settings. So under our distribution settings we can change our price class, so we can say okay, I only want to use edge locations in the US and Europe, or you could say only US, Europe and Asia and not South America. But if you're running a global organization you probably want to use all edge locations. In here you can set up an alternative domain name, and we will cover this off in the Route 53 part of the course, but essentially you can just type in cdn.acloud.guru, and then whenever somebody is trying to access your CDN network you can use that as the link as opposed to the one that AWS generates for you. So I'm going to leave that in there for now. But we will go in and configure that later. Actually, I might just take it out, but we will configure that later in the Route 53 example. Here's this SSL certificate. So by default, you can use the CloudFront SSL certificate. So they've got a wildcard certificate, and that's the easiest way to do it because it means you don't have to go out and install your own SSL certificates. But if you want to use your own SSL certificates, and you might use it if you're using your own alternate domain name, you would click this link and you'd have to upload and manage your certificates through there. Now your default root object is basically when you create a CloudFront distribution, you're going to get a long URL, and that's just going to take you to the bucket. Now if you're running a website out of here, you want the default landing page to be something like your index.html. So that's where you just put your default root object when you're trying to access that link. We'll just leave that blank for now though. Then you can enable logging, so you can say where you want to send your logs to which bucket, and then you can set your log prefix in here. You can also enable cookie logging, and I'm just going to switch those both off, and we just go down now and we will create our distribution. Now this does take some time, it's normally about 5-10 minutes. And now I am getting an error message saying one or more inputs is not valid, and it's going to be my TTL. So I think normally the minimum is 300 seconds, but what we'll do is we'll take that out and we'll just use our origin cache header. If we scroll back down again and hit create distributions, we shouldn't have any more problems. And there we go, we can see now that it is in progress, so it is building out our CDN. This is one that I've deployed earlier. And if we go across here we can see the domain name, and it's not very user friendly, so what you would normally want to do is use a CNAME in Route 53 to change that domain name to something like cdn.acloud.guru. So that's it for CloudFront. If you have any questions please let me know. If not, feel free to move on to the next lecture. Thank you.